You're listening to Mr. Radio, and I'm your host, Marshall. Andy and the Rattlesnakes was dubbed one of the great lost eclectic underground rock and roll bands by the LA Weekly, and the band is still making some of the greatest music of their careers, combining their classical sound with the musical influences they have absorbed over the past 3 decades. In the late 70s and early 80s, Andy and the Rattlesnakes captivated LA music fans with their exciting live performances. Since the self-release of their first single in March 1980, a cover of Neil Diamond's Solitary Man, the Rattlesnakes have always believed in the importance of the D.I.Y ethic. Their single, Third World Wives, was included on 1981's The D.I.Y album 10 of America's Best New Bands. We open today's show with Last Summer to Dance, a song which one Snakes fan wrote, "Last summer to dance made me get up and dance, literally. Put on your blue suede shoes and dig it." That fan was John Densmore of The Doors. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce today's guest, Andy and the Rattlesnakes' very own Andy Krikun. Welcome to our show, Andy.
Thank you for having me, Marshall. It's good to be here.
Well, good to have you here. I read about the D.I.Y album. What exactly is a D.I.Y album?
Well, there was a D.I.Y album and there was a D.I.Y movement that continues today that I think had its roots back there, probably earlier than the 1970s, but really came to the forefront in the mid-70s with independent record labels and D.I.Y for do-it-yourself, and not just independent record labels, but musicians, artists, bands releasing their own records, being in control of their own art and its distribution. But the D.I.Y album, it was short-lived, but it was an influential album because it had some of the bands that became pretty well known after that, like Black Flag and some others. So it was a great honor to be on that album. But so it was the beginning of what was going to be a record label and a magazine, but I don't think it survived.
Was this an extension of the garage band?
Yes and no. I mean, garage bands were an interesting development, which was kind of a suburban movement in the 60s, because you need a garage, right, to start to have a garage band. We came up thinking the Golden Fleece was being signed by a major record label, and we had a taste of that. It also applied to hip-hop or to dance music. It was about people creating their own scenes, and then maybe, which happened a lot with indie rock and hip-hop, bigger independent record labels and radio and major labels even kind of taking them on and trying to break them worldwide.
In a PR blurb that you had a reunion concert at Trip. The Santa Monica Mirror wrote that Andy and the Rattlesnakes were one of the first Los Angeles bands to break out of the 80s new wave punk mold into a reinvention of American roots and world music, sharing bills with artists that included Dwight Yoakam, Lucinda Williams, The Pop, The Sheiks of Shakes, John Hyatt, the Exuma, and playing charged-up shows at Cafe de Grand, the Starwood, the Whiskey, Blackie's, Madame Wong's, and the ON Club. These were definitely eclectic artists to share a bill with. And how in turn did their eclectic audiences react to your band?
Well, I think one thing that defined us, and I think still does, and all the band members have gone on to do many different projects in many different genres, is we didn't consider ourselves one genre of music. And I think whether it was the journalists or the labels or radio, throughout this new wave label that kind of was an umbrella to cover, it was after punk, so it was New York bands like Talking Heads and Blondie, and just Elvis Costello in England, and Graham Parker in England. So there was not really a sound to new wave. I think one thing that maybe defined new wave was just not being able to fit into one particular genre. So I think one thing that made us unique, and for me, I really sought out musicians that wouldn't normally be in a band together, and would bring their influences in. The guitar player was in a country band before the Rattlesnakes, and the keyboard player was more of a funk R&B person, and the sax player came from free jazz and avant-garde jazz and Frank Zappa, and the bass player was a solid 1960s rock and roll bass player, and the drummers really brought a lot of the world beat aspect to it, because they were what we mixed in reggae and ska and salsa and different rhythms that I think the drummers were key, and the percussionists, Mike Tempo, all of those influences. I think we absorbed them, and so there was a Rattlesnake sound, but it could be country, it could be R&B, it could be soul, it could be reggae. Because of that, we were able to kind of share bills with very eclectic artists, from John Hyatt to Black Flag. So I think that's an interesting take, and I think that's one of the defining characteristics of the band is all just bringing together all these eclectic musical influences, which also didn't bode well for record deals and and industry attention. We got some attention for a song here and there, but they want one. What is your sound? And that's really what they were looking for at the time.
So I guess that explains for me the difference between the opening tune that we started with, Last Summer to Dance, and you had a 1980 cover of Neil Diamond's Solitary Man, and that received national airplay and was chosen by L.A. Weekly's Bill Bentley as Single of the Month, threatening to drag folk rock out of the closet. I'd like our listeners to hear Solitary Man, but first, can you tell us a bit about this track?
The song has been covered many times after this, but I believe our version, predates all the other more well-known versions, except for Neil Diamond's, of course. And one of the things we like to do is we were the house band at this club called the Tourist Tavern in Venice, and we would have to do 3 sets a night, from 9 to 1 or 2. We really loved the idea of taking a known song and changing the genre and mixing it up. So I know Bill Bentley mentioned folk rock, but there's also a punk attitude and energy, which didn't really jive with what people thought about Neil Diamond at the time. But I loved the song. I was a Neil Diamond fan, and we did our own take on it.
Well, why don't we take a listen to Solitary Man?
Melinda was mine till the time that I found her holding Jim and loving him. Then Sue came along, loved me strong, that's what I thought. Me and Sue, that I told. Don't know that I will, but until I can find me a girl that'll stay and won't play games behind me, I'll be what I am, a solitary man, a solitary man. I've had it to here, being where love's a hard thing. It's a hard time thing. It's just a paper ring. I know it can be done. Having one girl who loves you, right or wrong, we go strong. Don't know that I will, but until I can find me a girl that'll stay and won't play games behind me, I'll be what I am, a solitary man, a solitary man. Don't know that I will, but until I can find me a girl that'll stay and won't play games behind me, I'll be what I am, a solitary man, a solitary man, a solitary man, a solitary man, solitary man, a solitary man, a solitary man, I'm just a solitary man.
That was Solitary Man, performed by Andy and the Rattlesnakes from the album Last Summer to Dance, Los Angeles, 1980-1981. And my guest is Andy Krikun. Yeah, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag right now. You're also known as Dr. Krikun, and you've done some interesting things in the field of music education. Perhaps you can share some of those experiences with our listeners.
After I left the band in 1980, I decided to, I had been a college dropout and decided to go back to college, move back to New York, where I came from, New Jersey, actually, and went back to college, got my music degree because I had never studied music before, and was exposed to, I just wanted to know more about different kinds of music, and really I learned to read music a little better and get some of my skills together. And then I moved back again to Los Angeles and got involved with, got fascinated with the immigrant community from people from Nepal, and studied, learned their music, and spent about a month over there meeting musicians, recording their music. Came back to UCLA and got my master's in ethnomusicology. And then, when my family moved back home to New York again in the early 90s, after a while, ended up teaching at Bergen Community College, and which has been incredibly rewarding, where I was able to really bring all of my experiences to really help shape the curriculum, and created the first rock ensemble there, the first songwriting class, the first world music class. So it's been great. It still is, just working with students. And also I did, as an aside, I did finish my doctorate in music education at NYU during the time I was teaching. So I did a lot of research about the early curriculum in community colleges in Los Angeles, who were really the first to bring jazz and popular music into the higher education curriculum back in the 1930s. So all of the academic and teaching experience has really, I think, fed into my creative life and vice versa. And I'm still, well, we're online now, as you know, teaching remotely, but
Well, I was
you
I
know,
was gonna I was gonna ask how this coronavirus situation is affecting the curriculum. What kinds of changes have you had to make?
well, positive and negative. I mean, one thing we've found is, which might have been obvious to some, but the movement towards online education seemed like it was just a train that couldn't be stopped. But students like in person. They miss seeing their teacher and being in the classroom, particularly in the arts. That one-to-one, hands-on experience is hard to replicate online. So all of our arts classes are being taught either remotely or online asynchronously. But the positive thing is, I dabble in technology, probably more than some people, but not as much as others. And I've been able to use tools and learn tools to enhance, the music classes and get, more electronically based music and cloud-based collaboration. So there's things that there are definitely positive aspects of this whole experience is in the educational setting.
Now, you've created some jazz groups at college, correct?
Yeah, well, when I came on, I was kind of there were just a couple of us, and one thing about community, again, as you know well, as for community college teachers, you're expected to be a jack of all trades and teach music 101, and I took over the jazz ensemble. I took over the music business curriculum, which was even though I was actively in that business years before, I didn't know all the ins and outs, and I had to kind of try to do that as we went along. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride there from the beginning, and we're still hoping to expand after we get through this pandemic and get back to the classroom, because I think we offer a very unique field of study, which we really embrace all musical genres and try to really look at students from whatever background they're coming from and see what we could do to enhance their education and life experience.
Well, let me go back from Doctor to Rattlesnakes, and I just wanted to ask about your song Patience. It was recorded for Rocket Records, which was Elton John's boutique label, and it was featured on the USA Network's New Wave Theater. I'd like to play that track, and perhaps you could introduce it for us.
Sure, that was a key, and it still is. That's kind of, every Solitary Man did quite well and, received radio play and was on the jukeboxes and kind of put us on the map. But Patience was an original song that I had written that still is, I think, our signature tune, which was really combining our musical influences with my growing awareness of the political situation, which the band was also a part of. My bandmates, Paul Lax, Morley Bartnoff, Rob Hasek, Jeff Holley, we were all very interested in what was going on in the world, whether it was Central America or any of it was kind of the beginning of the Reagan era. And we really took a lot of inspiration from what was happening in England with the Clash and, a lot of the reggae artists and what was called two-tone bands like UB40 and the Specials and Selector. So it's a long-winded introduction, but I think that sort of formed the Rattlesnake sound. Before that we were trying different things out, and I think that's, I believe, where it all came together, and everything kind of stemmed from that.
Well,
yeah.
Let's take a listen to Patience.
I get so fed up with things go down sometimes. My mind's in a tailspin, my eyes open wide. I end up with my head in my hand, so afraid no one will ever understand. But you gotta have patience. Have patience. Have patience. Have patience. Patience is a virtue, dealing with somebody like devices that save, devices destroy, devices leave our nation unemployed. Write it off the human error. There's no escape from the fear and terror when callous hearts and callous minds seize the power every time. Have patience. Have patience. Have patience. Have patience. Patience is a virtue, dealing with somebody like detail after detail. No one wants to hear. It'll all be forgotten in a couple of years. When headlines become bylines, bylines become headlines. We all walk a fine line. Ignore the danger signs. Yeah. Yeah. But you gotta have patience. Patience, patience. You gotta have patience. Have patience. Patience is a virtue, dealing with somebody like. Patience is a virtue, dealing with somebody like. Patience is a virtue, dealing with somebody like.
That was Patience by Andy and the Rattlesnakes from their album Last Summer to Dance, Los Angeles, 1980-1981. Andy and the Rattlesnakes disbanded in 1981, I think, but the members have continued to lead active musical lives. What are they up to nowadays?
Well, that's the thing. I was just thinking about this the other day. Even though the band broke up in 1981, we've all worked together in different forms, not in one unit until we recently reunited in 2012 for that show at the Trip. But through those years, it wasn't. We all stayed in touch, and sometimes we would do projects together. Myself and Paul, who's the guitar player, or myself and Jeff. Jeff had a band called Urban Artillery, and Jeff's the sax player, now living in Amsterdam, and has quite a active musical life there. Paul has been in all kinds of bands, from country bands like Icy Hawks in LA and Double Knot Spy Car, which is kind of an instrumental band. The keyboard is Morley Bartnoff, a.k.a. Cosmo Topper, has played with really amazing artists like Stu, who wrote Passing Strange. And everybody continues to do. Rob Hasek, the bass player, is also an accomplished visual artist. Mike Tempo, the percussionist, formed a band called the Bone Daddies that did mainly Afrobeat style of music. It would take pages and pages to list all of their, from theater to visual art. Mike Tempo, the percussionist, is also a visual artist. It's an incredible group of individuals that I feel very, very lucky, to have known, and we're all still kicking. Unfortunately, we've lost a couple former Rattlesnakes. That most recently, one of the early guitar players from 1979 was a great guitar player, Jack Sherman, who went on to be in the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and the drummer that you heard on that track doing really great, innovative, bringing again that world kind of beat feel to it was Andrew Campbell Hare, who passed away a couple years ago. So, we, as you know, every time now we open the obituaries, we see the passing of another, great musician. And so we're, we feel lucky to still be here. And since the reunion, we added Paul Lax, the guitar player's younger brother, John, who's a great drummer who grew up hearing us play. So sometimes he knows we'll be rehearsing and he knows the songs better than we do. So yeah, it's just an incredible group of passionate artists who to this day still follow their musical hearts.
Well, believe it or not, we have run out of time, so you're only going to get about 30 seconds or so to answer this question. I'm sure that after listening to some of the tracks on today's show, our listeners would like to hear more. Do you have plans for any new albums, and where can we find your music?
Well, thanks for asking. We have one new single that we recorded called Last Summer to Dance. That's available on all the streaming services, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and everywhere else. And also, we are planning on a documentary and album that we've been working on for almost the last decade to be released for the 40th anniversary of the band in 2021.
Well, I know I'm certainly looking forward to that. I'd like to close out by playing The Veil, and can you tell us in a few seconds something about this track?
Yeah, and this is an exclusive to you, Marshall. This is not the final version. Close to it, but we're still working on mixing and mastering. But this is a song with all of the current band members that we've been recording since 2012 with our special guest, John Densmore, from The Doors on percussion. So it's all the original 1981 band members, plus John Lax on drums, who's now officially a member of the band. So it was inspired by my work in Nepal and visiting Nepal and just learning about the music and the culture and changing my perspective on music and life.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and I hope to hear more from you real soon. So we're going to close with The Veil.
Thank you, Marshall.
You've been listening to Mr. Radio, and I'm your host, Marshall. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Mr. Radio.